Hello and welcome back to Perk Industries.
Yes, Perk.
Over the years I've always kept a book, specifically a book of circuits, and within this book, whenever I come across something, I tend to sort of scribble it down if I have an idea for something that I might want to try at another date. I'm a big fan of notebooks. In this, there's all sorts from different circuit bent ideas, so things like the circuit bent sequencer. I wanted to make an octo tremolo as a guitar pedal, the basic Atari punk console that you can probably find online, my own version of a sequencer, the PT2399 delay, all sorts of different circuits that I wanted to make at some point. Lots of them I still haven't, but over the course of last summer, with lots of time indoors, I was reading about how to maybe make some DIY Eurorack modules. And one of the parts of that I was never really 100% comfortable with was the whole idea of the power supplies that are used for Eurorack modules. And in a well-known sort of audio enthusiast forum, let's call it, namely Muff Wigglers, there is a thread there that was talking a lot about the notion of using passive circuits to modulate or to be sort of as a utility sort of effect with modular circuits. And there's lots and lots of what we would call passive modules already available. A lot of the passive mults, for example, where you can plug in many different jacks to the same source, are all passive. They don't require any electricity. And so I had it in my head to try and sort of compile a list of all of my favorite passive circuits and basically trawl the net and try and find as many different ones as I could, hopefully with a bit of use and maybe with some interesting effects. And as I said, on the forum Muff Wigglers, there's a really great post where I can't remember the name of the author, but the guy talks through a list of some of those different passive circuits that you might use, and I've added onto that and sort of tried to compile what I deem to be some really interesting ones that you can then use and integrate into a modular Eurorack system without the need of any other power. So the modules themselves provide the power. In the last video, when we looked at circuit bending and Eurorack, I discussed in a bit more depth about some of the voltages involved, and you will see here the fruits of that labour. This is the passive aggressive, named so because all of the circuits are passive. And let me just talk to you before we get into that about some of the circuits that were really up for consideration for going into this from that sort of ultimate list. So first of all, using vactrols we've spoken about before, but vactrols are absolutely superb for manipulating audio ins using CV. And the vactrols in this design on the passive aggressive, there's 3 different ones, and they are all using different coloured LEDs for slightly different sort of effects. So there's a red, green and an amber LED inside each of those, and they have a line in, a line out for audio, as I said, CV in, and that CV will alter whatever audio is going in. So the vactrol is a really useful thing, and that can also be used as a VCA or an LFO as well. And these two here on the passive aggressive are 2 examples where you can use the switch to switch between whether it is a VCA or an LFO, and again all completely passive. I was mulling over, especially with regard to this sort of empty space here, about using attenuators, but I've got, I think, in my setup enough attenuators to be going with, so I could have added them. They're quite simply just a variable resistor potentiometer to attenuate whatever sound is going in or out. I looked at switched multiples as well, whether or not I wanted to have any more sort of passive multiples. Again, like we mentioned earlier, something that you might plug an input into and then have lots of outputs. But again, I've got about 3 in the Eurorack setup, so I didn't feel it was necessary. The whole world of logic is possible. There can be different combinations of ORs or AND circuits, and logic's a whole other thing that we probably won't get into today, but the whole idea of using logic gates or something to simulate logic gates passively could be an idea. Didn't include it in this, but was on the list. Half-wave rectifiers, the idea of an expression pedal being able to be plugged in as well, all passive circuits. One I did include here called Sun is the option to have a solar panel plug-in, and I'll show you that in action later, where quite simply you plug in the solar and you will receive, assuming the solar panel it gets enough light, you'll receive a voltage out which you can use for CV. Other things that were included, you could look at R2R ladders, which is that a sort of weird resistor ladder mixing device. You can plug anything anywhere and get different sort of mix combinations. I previously built one last month, so I didn't think I needed to include one of those on here as well. Other things, slew limiter could be possible. Different types of filters, which we've got here. There is a high pass filter and a low pass filter with a rotary dial to select between that. I do have some of these as other sort of devices, but I thought it'd be useful to have on board here as well. I've got a pedal that was a DIY outcome from something that I found on eBay. I was thinking about a glitch loop, so you have a loop for your pedals that you send out and in. Switching on this circuit, again passively, would create odd glitches. But I didn't really want to get stuck into being reliant on guitar pedals being a part of this, so I've sort of neglected to include that as well. And then, yeah, I went about sort of thinking what different types of other things could I find beyond that sort of list on the forum, and I had a look at yeah, a number of other sort of sites and a number of other passive modules to see if there was any inspiration that could be taken. So in the notebook, yeah, we pretty much just sort of jotted down as many as possible, and one of my favorites that I thought might be worth trying to sort of make my own version of is a module that you can buy. I'm just looking through the notes now, and this module is called the Confuser. It's made by Electron, and the Confuser seems to be a series of 4 inputs and 4 outputs with 4 switches. So I've had a look at trying to replicate a version of that on board here. So Confuse features, yeah, 4 inputs, 4 outputs, and you can mix and switch through combinations of different sort of switching routes using the 4 switches to create odd patterns that clash, but I found it to be really good in using them to run sort of 4 different CV signals in and out, and use it to actually change structure mid-set. So if you were playing live and you wanted to structure a song and change it on the hoof, then you can work through the 4 switches and use it that way, and I'll show you an example of that. Something else I considered as well was like a series of sort of A/B switches where you could again switch between different sources of CV, different modules, and again I've got a couple of those in the Eurorack, so I didn't want to use any real estate on the passive aggressive for any switching. Underneath the lid there's a fair amount of rat's nest wiring, but it's really a prototype before sort of going any further forward, so really aesthetically inside it didn't matter too much what it looked like, but on the outside, as you can see, I sort of tried to panel off with a nice silver pen all of the different areas, and then Dymo label all of the different functions. I'm not particularly accurate drilling through metal, I must admit, so you'll notice there's a fair amount of wonkiness. In time, I'd like to think about rolling this out and designing a circuit board for it, so designing a PCB and making it so that all of these components fit and slot onto the board, so it's all sort of mounted through hole and then sort of bolts up into an enclosure. I went with the aluminium case because I've got a couple of these lying around, but they might look quite nice in wood. I was thinking akin to the Coma field kits. It might look quite nice in sort of a similar way to that. And of course this whole thing could be mounted inside a Eurorack case. I've just taken recent delivery of I think it's my 4th Eurorack skiff, because I've clearly got issues, and I was thinking about maybe making it to fit in that, but again it's Eurorack space real estate and it doesn't need the Eurorack power, so it ended up becoming a sort of separate entity, a separate case that you can add to it. So I just want to go through a little bit about each of the different devices. We've mentioned a few already. Yeah, we've got, starting up here, we've got the high pass filter. So as I said, there's an input and an output just for audio, and as you click through each of the different parts to the rotary switch there, you will get different band passes in the sort of high pass. Same with the low, exactly the same, but for obviously lower end, so you get to filter through the different low bands. The sun, yeah, as I've mentioned, is solar, so the solar panel plugs in. If you've got a sort of mini jack, you can plug that straight in, and then whatever voltage comes out you can use for CV, assuming it generates, you know, at least a sort of volt of electricity would be useful for something. I've got quite a big solar panel, so I'll show you that in a moment. This down here, warp, this was something that you might have seen on our Instagram, where we've been working at a circuit that was made by a guy called Crust Punk Hippie, who I've bought lots of Lunetta circuits from in the past, and he's a wonderful guy, very generous, and generous with not just free PCBs sometimes, but with his knowledge as well. And I've built a sort of Lunetta based series of a similar sort of thing, a collection of different circuits in one box. That we might talk about another day. But this is his idea for a circuit. Quite simply, it's CV in, CV out, although it does work with other gates and triggers as well. And there are two, again, rotary switches, and this one adjusts the value of a resistor based on the ones that are inside. So it's something like 150 ohms all the way up to pretty much 2 ohms. And their series on the bottom rotary potentiometer here, that changes different capacitor values, and that combination of the resistor that you select and the capacitor that you select warps whatever CV goes in, makes some awesome bleeps and bloops. And again, if you want to see what that sounds like, we'll show you later on. And there's a little LED that lights up when that warp takes place. The adapt portion here was something that I've always just wanted to have, because I think they're just useful. Again, completely passive, but this allows you to plug in any combination of plugs or connectors that you might wish. So it's essentially stereo, so there is a left row and a right row, and we've got mini jacks, phono, large jacks, mini stereo, obviously larger stereo, and these two odd things are the connectors that you normally find on guitar pedals. But I wanted these to make an appearance as well, because some of the test equipment I've got, the inputs and outputs for those are so happen to be the same as the power supplies for guitar pedals. So I wanted to be able to send maybe something out to an industrial filter, for example. So they're all completely interchangeable. You can plug as many different things in and out as you like across, yeah, a stereo signal, which is useful. Up here, the VCA LFO, which I mentioned, there's audio in, audio out, and CV in, and the CV obviously will dictate what will happen to the input signal. You can switch between VCA and LFO, and it was quite a small circuit, so I put 2 of those in. And finally, as I've mentioned, the Confuse module as well, and I've had great fun testing that with the Mutable Instruments marbles, because it generates not just 4 different CV signals, but also 3 different gates or triggers based on the clock that it receives. So that was quite cool, and I'll show you that in action as well. So that was really sort of the first part. It was taking a list of different circuits. I want to talk through what some of those look like in the book itself. So over the course of, yeah, like the year, these were some of the circuits that we were using, and on this side you'll see the list that I already read out to you earlier. Excuse my handwriting, but some of the circuits we looked at were the potential of a passive tone control. So you can see here we've got pots for bass and for treble, and all of these you can find online. You know, just a Google search for passive audio circuits took me straight to where I could find lots of them in different forums with different sort of DIY and audio enthusiasts that are happy to share these. So there are loads of these online that you can find yourself. This one down here, this is the high and the low pass filters, and just seeing the hand-drawn nature of this, I suspect these are taken from the Forrest M. Mims electronics book that I definitely had as a kid. I think I had it given to me by my father, but it's absolutely superb. for some different ideas. So you can see that there's a rotary switch that switches between all the different capacitor values to give you the low or the high pass. Over the page here, these were some others. There was the passive VCA and LPG circuit here, and you can see the vactrol there is an LED and LDR combination, and we talked a bit about those in the last video. This also has a switch between two different capacitor values, so you can switch between which mode you want, VCA or LPG. There are some other examples here. This is a transistor based version, which basically takes in your audio in, your CV in, and uses a transistor to add effect to the output signal. Again, another variation on that that's a bit noisier at the bottom here. Coming across the page, we've got some other things that we might look at here. It seems to be like a pan device. This one here was a swing type VCA that I was looking at, that will take a kind of sloped signal there, and will apply a sort of oscillation to it as well based on whatever signal is fed in. I didn't end up going with that one in the end. Another very simple the vactrol circuit, and this was the one we used, which is quite simply audio in, CV in to the LED, which affects the LDR, which also happens to be connected to the audio in, and then sent to an output. There's some other little sketches here as well, other variations on the vactrol theme, and I sort of went about the process of looking at what we would put in. So this was the sort of original list, what to sort of include, and I added really later on the solar in and out, and the CV circuit for warping by Crosspunk Hippie there ended up making an appearance too. There's a few other circuits that didn't make the cut here. This is another version of a tone control, and another one that I thought might be quite nice. It's not here in the book, but the ring modulator circuit, you can get a passive version of that to use as well. So from there, really, again, I sort of went and had a little bit of a look at some different modules that were passive for inspiration. So as I said, this I think it's pronounced Allegatron. The confuser was one that we sort of, well, I interpreted really and tried to make a version of. And the AB switching that I mentioned, we didn't end up using as well. The hard part really is then looking at really how to lay these things out, and there's a few boxes that I've sort of come into possession of for different types of sort of old electrical products that I wanted to repurpose, and this was an attempt at really using one of those. I've since changed my mind about that and didn't go with that, but you can see the sort of planning for trying to lay out how these things would fit together. And then really the final part was then, all right, where are all these different circuits going to be mounted? How could they be arranged on a case? Again, that didn't end up coming into fruition, but it was the sort of the start of thinking about it, and certainly a major consideration was how many mini jacks I would need to make this all work. So you can see that there's a bit of thought there. The CV warp circuit, this is the original one. If you look up Crosspunk Hippie on WordPress and look at either his WordPress or his Instagram, he talks through how you can make a version of the CV warp circuit, which is literally input jack, output jack, an RGB LED. That was about the only component I had to buy in, which means it's only got an anode and a cathode, positive and negative leg, but it will cycle through 3 different RGB colours. That pretty much dictates how the effect happens in conjunction with whatever resistor we've got here. So he suggests a 1K to start off, and 10 odd farad capacitor there. But I was sort of thinking really that my revision of that, the Mark II here, could be made a bit more interesting by sticking with the one RGB LED, but then having a rotary switch to control which one of these resistors is used at any given point, and which one of these electrolytic caps is used. So that's certainly something that really opened up the range of different bleeps and bloops open to you with the circuit. So again, lots of different things that you can actually you can try and you can modify, but that, yeah, as I say, was Mark II of that. So that was the thinking. That was the circuits book, but we took about 4 days to build this thing, and yeah, as you can see, it's quite a big thing, but it works pretty well. I'm going to go through now and give you some demos of some of the different parts, and we'll just have a look at what effects they have. And then after that, I want to try and use as many of these in the same patch as possible, and just sort of play through some kind of piece that integrates all of it. So let's have a look at how each of them sound. Modules that I'll be using will be plates, elements, rings. I'll also be using pluck and to generate a lot of the CV, as I've mentioned, and an element of randomness to it, sort of self-generating. Will feed a clock pulse into marbles, which will dictate a lot of what sort of signals are being generated. So let's have a look at how it sounds. Okay, let's start by having a look at some of the features. First of all, let's grab some patch cables to join modules to the mixer, and then you'll be able to hear what is going on. So let's start by plugging in the output of rings. And from rings, what we're going to do first is show off the warp module. And we're going to send CV. That is going to be generated by marbles here, and that CV is going to go in to the warp, out to the voltage octave in of rings, and we're going to give it a trigger as well, just another random trigger from marbles, and put that into what is labelled the strum input. So at that point, when we bring up the volume, you should be able to hear the effect that we have of the warp on the CV signal that goes straight into rings. If we start to adjust the resistor value, you can hear as I cycle down, it drops the pitch. Let's bring that back up. And then have a look at changing the second dial here for the capacitor, which has another exponential effect on the pitch. Let's try changing the CV and also the frequency of rings. And as you can hear, you've got quite a lot of control on kind of oddities that happen to the CV signal. Just the CV straight, if it wasn't going into the warp, if it was just going into rings, it's more of a straight pulse. A few glitches in the timing, courtesy of marbles, but if we go back into the warp, you can hear the effect that has. Let's switch across, try it with plates just very quickly. So we've got the trig in, voltage per octave in and an out. And you'll hear with plates that with the warp we get instant bass. Let's change that up a bit and cycle through some of plates modes. We could also take another trig from marbles and we could add that to one of my favourite features of plates, which is the model. Oh no, that's going to need to be a CV, sorry. Let's try that instead. Cycle through some more of those warp settings between the resistor and the capacitor combinations, and it becomes unruly. So in short, that's warp. Right, next let's have a look at one of the bandpass filters. Let's have a quick look at the low pass because obviously you don't see both. They're both similar in how they work. So what we'll do is take a signal. Let's take a signal out from plates. That can go into the input, and the output will go to my mixer. Let's give plates some CV, and let's also give it a trigger. Oh, trigger from marbles, and bring it up. So take a listen to how we cycle through the different capacitor values in the low pass. Not all of the positions on these 12-point switches were used, so really you can hear there almost nothing, and it's slowly coming in. Probably could have gone with a bassier frequency. You can hear it cuts that quite high, chops off each of the frequency. A very simple low pass filter. Moving on, let's have a look at the vactrols. So if I take out the connections that we've got so far, and if we add an output from vac 1, we can take again an output. This time let's go from rings and add that as our input, and then we'll give it a little bit of CV from marbles, and we'll also give it a trigger from marbles 2. Oh, and finally it will need a voltage CV signal to tell rings what notes to play. Straight away you can hear how the CV that comes from marbles is cutting the signal in this vactrol here that goes to the rings, chopping it in and out. So it's a really good way of breaking and adding phrasing into different melodies that you might have. Let's try it, the same setup but in vactrol number 2, see if you can hear any differences. So there'll be different colour LEDs will have different impact on the sound. As you can hear, this one's a little bit brighter sounding, and the third one is a little darker. So they were the 3 different vactrol units that exist on the passive aggressive. Let's move now to look at the sun mode, and in particular how that might be triggered by a solar panel. So for that, obviously we're going to need a solar panel. I think we'll go again with, let's go with plates again, but we'll just connect the output for now. And I'm just going to go and grab a panel. So my favourite solar panel is this enormous thing. This is from a home security sort of light. I'm just going to pop it just at the bottom here. It was modified so that it has one of these usual sort of Eurorack jacks on the bottom, and what we'll do is place that in to the passive aggressive and take a patch that is coming out and go straight to the octave on plates. So when we bring up the volume, you can hear quite a high-pitched squeal. And hear how that changes in pitch according to my hand movement. So theremin-like, very much a theremin. Of course we can just give that a bit more life by running plates through into clouds, and that will give us hopefully a little bit more interest. Oh, everything's moving. And adjust plates. Just cycling through some of the plate sounds. This is a really nice way to, you get a nice solo with one of these things. Just go through some more plate sounds. And this is just using the light that's above me here, the little desk lamp, to provide some light for this solar panel. Obviously out in the sun, you can generate more voltage, and you can control your voltage per octave with a bit more. So that is the sun mode, which is using solar panel in order to connect CV to any other module that might require it, so that you can play like solo parts or adjustable tones according to your needs. So next, let's have a look at the VCA and the LPG. I've labelled it as an LFO, but it's not. It's actually a low pass gate. And what I've done here is, again, I've taken marbles at the heart of things to provide a CV to pluck, the 2 HP pluck module. It's also given it a CV signal, but the out from pluck is going straight into the VCA LPG, and the out goes straight to the mixing desk. Also coming from marbles is another sort of feed. Let's give it another CV, and when we turn up, you can hear at the moment we've got it set quite quiet and quite slow, but when we turn up the pace of marbles, we get up the rate. You can hear the effect that has as that kicks in when the CV is sent to it. Let's just turn up the pace of marbles a bit, and in turn the CV sent to pluck and to the passive aggressive. Let's adjust the pitch and the damp. Quite a crunchy clip as that CV comes in and out. You can see the LED lighting up as the effect is added to the signal. It might sound a little bit more interesting if we ran that through clouds. So let's just add a patch into clouds. So from the passive aggressive to the input of clouds. So now there's a few more overtones, interesting delays. You could build a nice little ambient piece with this. Flicking the switch, you'll hear how the low pass gate kicks in. Switching back, adding some more pace, changing the CV output of marbles. And let's also just bring the pitch up on pluck. And it's a nice little technique. There's two here on board, obviously, so you can have two different independent signals going through those as well. So that is the VCA LPG. Let's just bring the sound down for that and start again with the patching. And finally, I'd like to show my favourite, I think. Confuse is great fun. For this one, what I think we'll do is take 4 different CV signals from marbles. So marbles has X1, X2 and X3, which generate different CV signals, but it also has Y, which flips between positive negative voltage. So I'm just going to put, without any real thought or care or attention, each of those 4 into the 4 inputs of Confuse, and you'll see that when they trigger positive, the LEDs here will light up to signal what is happening. So with that, I'm going to take the output from Confuse and put it as the voltage octave for plates. Going to also add that to the voltage input for rings. Do the same for elements. And also, again, we're going to try that with pluck as well, if my cable will reach. Let's see. Yeah, I think it will. Let's just switch those around just to make sure the cables reach. There we go. So we've got all of those set. The only other thing that these modules will need is they will need a trigger. All those signals are down low at the minute. One wire in the wrong place. There we go. Right, so at that point you can see it's a mess of wires everywhere, but if we introduce each of the sounds, sounds like elements. Let's pan that slightly. Rings. It's quite dirty. Pluck and plates. Get a nice plate sound. As you see, due to the speed that we have got set for marbles, let's just slow that down a bit. Now, none of these modules are tuned. This is all completely at random. And as you can see, 4 input CVs, 4 outputs, and quite simply just switch through the different Confuse switches, creating hopefully different patterns. Up the pace of marbles. Just cycle through some of the settings on the module. Slow down again. Settings in Confuse. So that is the Confuse model, and you can see there all the lights blinking away, which is quite useful to know how things are routed and coming in and out. Interesting to have marbles at the heart of this, driving all the different CV signals, although anything that makes a CV or even a trigger you can put into Confuse. So that is that one. Finally, I don't think I really need to demonstrate as such. I'm sure you've all seen adapters before, but the section adapter at the bottom there, as I mentioned, is really all to be used for any kind of adaptations that you might need to do. So whether it's to integrate like different guitar pedals, or if you've got something that's an RCA, like for example a K oscillator has an RCA, Mark 1 K oscillator will slot straight into one of those, or if you just want to adapt to sort of stereo jacks, then it's just a really useful thing that you might wish to have. Okay, so let's do the bit where we add everything in together. Let's make a piece that uses as much of the passive aggressive as possible and see what that sounds like.